Hello and welcome to Local Digital's show and tell about the work we've been doing to analyse local government software markets. I'm Ellie Brown, a senior product manager within Local Digital, and I will hand over to my colleague Johnny to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Johnny Hugill. I'm co-managing director of Public. Public have been working with the Local Digital team.
Thank you. So, through previous research and pilots with councils, we've heard a lot about the challenges that they're facing when procuring technology. We've heard about challenges such as poor interoperability between systems, lack of transparency in pricing, limited competition and choice. And these challenges were also reflected in the blueprint for modern digital government, which has recognised the need to help local government with technology procurement and strategic supplier management in order to achieve better outcomes and value for money. To better understand and validate the challenges, we have been analysing large amounts of council procurement and spend data so that we can build an evidence base of the software markets, recognising that each market is different and that there may also be council practices or dynamics that influence them. We also recognise that with local government reorganisation, there will be an impact in terms of potential market consolidation, mass data migration, and the impact of implementation. But with that, there are also opportunities to reconsider how much software local government procures. So I'd like to hand over to Johnny, who will talk you through the approach that we've taken to our analysis and what we've learned.
Thanks very much, Ellie. And I'm just going to share my screen. As Ellie mentioned, we've been working with the Local Digital team to look at the current health and state of software markets for local councils. This has come from our work with the Local Digital team conducting an independent evaluation of the Local Digital programme. As part of that work, we heard from councils, from suppliers, and in the sector more broadly, that software markets may not have been operating as effectively and efficiently as everyone wanted, and that sometimes software systems, contracts and procurement processes could represent a barrier to effective digital transformation. So Public has a team of digital specialists, technologists, data scientists, economists and procurement experts. And we've been working with the Local Digital team to try and really quantify the current state of the software market for local councils, to identify any barriers and blockers, and also to design potential interventions and recommendations that could better support both councils and suppliers going forward. So to do that, we've looked at 5 kind of key markets as a starting point. We've looked at housing management systems, social care, both in the adult and children's sector. We've looked at ERP systems and IMS systems for councils, kind of core financial systems. We've looked at revenue and benefit systems, and finally at councils' financial management systems. We've looked at these for a few different reasons. First of all, these tend to represent some of the biggest areas of technology spend for councils, so they're some of their most important technology contracts. Second, we recognise that these systems often represent a bit of a kind of digital backbone where other systems and service areas might interact with. And then finally, many of these systems are relevant to some of the funding programs and interventions that the Local Digital programme has pursued in the past, for example, via the Local Digital Fund. So we thought that looking at these 5 areas would represent a great starting point to understand what's happening across the local government software market. Now, to really gain the full picture, we'd have to do the same exercise across all areas of local council spend, but we think this is a good start. So this page here that you can see links to individual data tools that describe the current state of these different software markets. If you click through to each of them, you're then able to look at the individual pages and the data beneath them. A few comments just on navigation and on the data itself. So the data here was collected through a combination of automated and manual processes. As far as possible, we try to get data from publicly available contracting sources like Contracts Finder or Find a Tender service, as well as some of the contract data aggregators that might pull together that data. Usually that didn't give us enough of the full picture, and for each of the markets we tried our best to get contract data or spend data for every single council. So we use that as a starting point, but then we would usually have to build on it. So we would then look at things like contract registers that might be hosted on individual council websites. Those might be published on a council's website by a council by council basis. We would sometimes look at spend data that may have been published from their financial management systems that didn't quite have as much richness as contract data, but we might be able to make assumptions about their spend. Sometimes we relied on freedom of information requests that had been made by other people, where we were able to capture reliable data for councils at scale. And sometimes we might even use things like council minutes, council internal reporting, or other PDF format data. And bringing that all together for each of these markets, we have pretty much a complete view of every single software vendor that's been working with councils. And as far as we can, we also have richer contract data like contract value, contract duration, as well as other important information about a contract or a relationship. We will say here, and important to caveat, this data will not be complete and nor will it be perfect. It's been captured from publicly available sources via web scraping and via data aggregation. If any data is missing or is incomplete or is now out of date, that will mean that our records are not correct and are not perfect. For this data to be truly accurate, it would need councils to independently validate, verify, and submit all of their spend. And currently there is not a centralized process for doing that. So I would say, while this is the best possible data that can be captured from publicly available sources, it will not be perfect. Our recommendation then is not to use this for any individual council or any individual supplier, but rather to kind of indicate broader trends and broader takeaways for the sector. And that's what we'll be talking about today. To navigate the pages, as I mentioned, you're able to click through into an individual page, and then you're able to return through to this page. And then finally, the data on the individual pages, this is built in Microsoft Power BI, can be worked with in a kind of flexible, interactive way, and it can also be copied and moved off system. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through some of the key takeaways from these markets. We're going to really sort of show the data trends as well as how this tool can be used. And we'll finalize with some key takeaways and recommendations for the sector. So we will go through a few of them. We're going to start with revenues and benefits. Revenues and benefits systems, which, as we've said here, specifically relate to the back office systems for collections of council tax, as well as provision of local benefits. So what we've got here is the kind of home page that talks you through what the systems does and the contract data that we have available. If you click through to the first page of most of these, it will give a kind of overall view of the market share. Now, we think this is important to basically show the level of competition and dynamism in a given market. Our advice here is to look at a market kind of individually, but also to start to see where we can see trends across markets, where maybe there's a supplier that has a large market share across markets. This is a market that has a relatively low number of suppliers. So you can see here 3 suppliers, NEC, Capita, and Civica, who have captured the market share. If you click through, you can then look through to the individual contracts and market share that each of those suppliers represents. Where we can, we've captured things like the contract data, and in this case, you can see that we've assigned contract data to individual suppliers in a different way. Again, worth noting that that data won't be perfect because we've been unable to get full contract duration data for all of the contracts and all of the suppliers. Something we've tried to do here, and you'll see in this case we were only able to do it for one supplier, is we've tried to understand how pricing for different software products and services might work. Now, this came primarily from the fact that many councils during our evaluation commented that it was sometimes difficult to understand how to price or how much they should be paying for a given service, and also that it was difficult to benchmark their pricing or payments against other councils. So one of the things we've tried to do is look at the overall trend of pricing for different software products, but also to look at the individual pricing requirements, habits, and behaviors of the software vendors themselves. In this case, we've tried to benchmark the prices that are being paid against property quartile value. And similarly, we've looked at how contract value might be differing on a supplier by supplier basis. You'll see as we run through the different markets, some of the different price benchmarking approaches that we've used. They're all obviously different depending on what we think that kind of core software market is trying to achieve. I'll note here at the top, this is an interactive tool that can allow you to filter. So you can filter by different council types, which means district council, county council, etc. You can filter by region within the UK. You can filter the council type by rural and urban, and then finally by the broad population bin. That filtering tool you'll see is consistent across the whole piece. We think that's really important because people will be using this tool for different purposes, and that filtering will allow them to really focus on the data they need. We've tried to look at when contracts are expiring, as well as the overall contract duration and contract values. Again, this is only of the data set that we have where we have that level of data. We do have the supplier for every single council, as far as is up to date in publicly available data. And then we have the contract value and the contract duration for a smaller subset. But again, it shows us a general trend. Some of the things you will see is still a fairly significant portion of contracts that are running really quite far into the future. A number of contracts here are some, again, just from our sample, is as much of nearly £11 million worth of contracts running through to 2035. You'll see an average contract duration of 5.1 years, and the general trend we are seeing is an environment where there are quite long software contracts. 5 is in fact the mean, and there are some contracts significantly longer. And for all of the different markets we look at, there are contracts running up until at least mid 2035, mid 2030, and in some cases even longer. I'll note here the average contract value. You'll see how that changes on a case-by-case basis across the different markets. One thing to flag here is that price comparisons between individual councils can be difficult because they might be paying for a slightly different set of services or modules. Again, it shows us kind of directionally what people might be expecting to pay in a given market or a given sector. And then finally, for where we have the data available, we've been able to do a bit of underlying analysis to understand how a given procurement system, how a given system was procured, which we think is a really valuable kind of insight into the broader purchasing habits of councils when it comes to local council software. So you can see on the left-hand side, we've given the kind of broad procurement routes that a council might look at. So a framework is when a council has purchased the software via either a CCS, Crown Commercial Service Framework Agreement, or a similar framework agreement hosted by another authority or central purchasing organisation. We've also, some might be via what we've called here an ITT, which would represent an open tender. And in other cases, there are other procurement mechanisms that might have been used, including a direct award or an exemption from procurement at all. On the right-hand side, you can see the deep dive into the individual framework agreements that might have been used. Many of these on the right-hand side are Crown Commercial Services frameworks, including the top two that you see there, Data and Application Services and Vertical Application Solutions. Those are both Crown Commercial Service frameworks. So what we're seeing is that it is an environment in this case where we think revenue and benefit systems are being primarily procured via frameworks. And then on the right-hand side, you can see that some of the frameworks that are most popular are the centrally hosted Crown Commercial Service frameworks. I do note that there is quite a lot of diversity in the frameworks that have been used, and that would suggest that councils might not be using a kind of framework that feels fit for purpose for buying revenue and benefit systems, but are using different frameworks in different ways. There may be an opportunity to consolidate both the procurement routes, but also the framework agreements that are being used to purchase individual systems. So that's an overview of revenue and benefits. We've got similar analysis, for example, for ERP systems. ERP systems are, of course, really important core council software covering, finance, HR, procurement, and many other core corporate functions. And we can see here a market where there is a higher level of competition. It's worth noting that, similar with revenue and benefit systems, there are 3 suppliers that seem to have a kind of dominant share. And particularly you'll note Unit 4, where we've identified 77 live contracts with Unit 4. But more broadly, there is a higher level of smaller market players that you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, who'll have a smaller number of contracts between 1 and 5. We've done the same analysis for income management systems because the two systems are often highly related. And that again exhibits a similar kind of overall market dynamic. This is something you'll notice looking through all of the individual software markets. In general, we see a small number of suppliers who have a large market share. Our team of economists have actually analysed this using an economic model for looking at levels of market consolidation, and we found that in all cases but one, all of the markets exhibit what we would call as high markets of consolidation when compared with markets in the private sector. So similar analysis you'll see here. We've got pricing. Here we've got some slightly different insights on pricing, which we were able to gather. So we can look at how ERP pricing varies by council type. County councils obviously paying the largest amount, not surprising given the relative size of those councils. I think what we were interested to see is whether the council size properly correlated with the cost that they were paying. We also were able to look at how costing might be impacted, in this case for IMSs, by hosting arrangement. This was by looking at the pricing of some of the different suppliers, and we looked at how cloud hosted might be different from supplier or on-premise hosted solutions. These we thought were kind of key considerations from a pricing perspective that a council might have to factor in when thinking about the next procurement of their ERP or IMS systems. And again, we've been able to break down that pricing by supplier. Same caveat applies. Direct supplier comparisons usually can't be made on a case-by-case basis because there may be multiple services or multiple modules bundled, but you can see an overall trend of suppliers that are either at the top or the bottom of that kind of pricing continuum. Same analysis on the contract lengths. So we've got again a large sort of book value of contracts that are expiring into the 2030s, which you can see at this point, as well as just a kind of smooth plateau of contracts that will be expiring between now and 2030. We think this is important, first of all, because of the reason I mentioned before. It's important to understand that there's a large contract value expiring well into the 2030s and sometimes into the 2040s. This has been a useful tool for identifying specific opportunities and interventions with councils. It's very useful for the local digital team to have oversight of when key contracts might be expiring, to give both the council and the local digital team enough kind of time and runway needed to address their contract ahead of renewal or reprocurement. A very common challenge and a very common pitfalls that procurement teams fall into is that future planning for their existing contracts might come too late in the process, and that might leave commercial teams with not as many options as needed when looking at a reprocurement or a renewal. So this is trying to give that data kind of at scale so that we can identify some of those cases across the council. But again, you will see a large amount of contracts that are running really for quite some time, some as many as 10 years. This also just gives us an overview of where we've been able to find active contracts via contracts that have recently expired. And finally, we'll look at the social care market, which is covering both adult social care systems and children's care systems. We have the same kind of market segmentation analysis here. And again, you can see the same exhibited features before, usually 3 or 4 software vendors having a kind of larger market share. And we have the pricing breakdown as well. And we run through, and there's same kind of analysis. In this case, we tried to look at whether pricing we think properly correlates with the number of social workers. And to do that, we were able to compare this with the social worker, which are numbers which are broken down into bins, which basically just means ranges. So we've got social worker ranges in individual councils. Those ranges go from 0 to 100 all the way to 400 plus. And we've basically tried to see whether pricing of how much councils are actually paying based on their contract and spend data, whether we think that correlates to the number of social workers that they have in the council. If this was working perfectly, you'd see a perfectly smooth kind of series of step ups from the beginning to the end. we can see definitely the right kind of trend, although it's interesting to see that maybe that isn't quite as smooth as it should be. That might be individual cases where councils are either over or underpaying for a given service, depending on the number of social workers that they have. We recommend that kind of analysis. I think is most useful for individual councils to do themselves. They can look at the number, for example, of social worker bins, the bin they fall in for their number of social workers, and then see whether they think that the cost compared with the kind of national benchmark feels appropriate. That can be a useful tool in future planning and negotiation with your vendors. We've done the same thing here, broken down on a supplier by supplier basis. And that means that a council is able to look at any given supplier that they may be working with and understand a bit better where their price might be benchmarked according to their peers. Again, looking at contract expiries, we can see actually probably fewer running sort of really into the long term, into 23, 24. But again, a number of contracts that are running still for quite some time. We have a duration of contracts here that's 5.5 years and an average value annually of 260,000. Again, those figures of a mean contract value of 5.5, just like we saw 5.1 with Revs and Bens, is quite high and indicates that we have an environment where councils are signing quite large long-term contracts with their core software vendors. And then we've got the same overall analysis about route to market here. I think both useful for councils, but also for central government colleagues who may be thinking about supporting with procurement routes or procurement frameworks. We see, again, frameworks have been quite popular here, probably less similar market share, in fact, as when we, similar sort of framework purchasing habits as when we looked before. We have some of the same frameworks repeated from our last piece of analysis, some of those core CCS frameworks. But again, it looks like there may be opportunities to consolidate the use of different frameworks for what feels like quite similar purposes, both using Crown Commercial Service frameworks, but also some of the other frameworks offered by procurement purchasing organizations like YPO and NEPO. And then final point just on this market in particular is that we've been looking both for adult and children's social care, but also for modules that cover slightly different parts of the value chain. So in this case, we've looked at the case management system vendors at the top, you can see there, and at the bottom we've looked at the financial management systems for adult and children's social care payments. One thing you'll notice is that many of the vendors are quite similar. And in fact, we've conducted deeper analysis to see exactly where there is overlap between vendors in the adult social care case management sector and in the financial and the finance system sector for social care. This probably is an indication of the phenomenon of bundling that's discussed quite a lot in the local council software market. So there are many cases where we see the same vendor offering many different sort of bundled modules or services, either within a sort of single service area like social care and sometimes even far beyond. And this can be very convenient for councils because it might give them a single supplier or a single system that covers a large number of their kind of core service areas. It can also create challenges from an interoperability perspective, or it can in some cases lead to a kind of lock-in scenario where the working arrangement with the vendor isn't as productive as it could be. That's a quick run through for 3 of the markets. So we covered revenue and benefits, ERP and IMS. We covered social care. You can do the same analysis just looking at financial management systems and housing management systems, and you'll see the same broad flow. So for housing management systems, for example, you will see a market share, in fact, a slightly more diverse market share than some of the other markets we've looked at. You will also look to be able to see contract value by supplier breakdown, by a number of different sort of bins. And in this case, in particular, we looked at the pricing according to the housing stock within a given area. So just like we tried to see whether pricing benchmarked effectively to social worker numbers for adult social care systems, for housing, we've tried to basically understand our suppliers' pricing and our councils paying broadly in line with the amount of housing stock that they have in an area. And the takeaway really is the same. It is broadly following the right pattern, but there seem to be some outliers either overpaying or underpaying that have meant that trend that should be slightly smoother perhaps isn't as smooth as it could be. So that is a very quick overlap of everything that you'll find in this tool. We hope that you find the data interesting. We think that it's useful for individual councils to make more informed procurement and purchasing decisions, to identify opportunities for collaborating with other councils or collaborating better with their suppliers, to support future contract renegotiations and planning. We think all this data and transparency can be really helpful, but we also think it can be very helpful to central government departments. Of course, that includes the local digital team, but for any central government team or purchasing organisation that has some kind of remit for local government software, we hope that this data can provide some valuable insights. Thanks, Ellie.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Johnny. And as Johnny said, we very much want this to be the start of the conversation. And in terms of next steps, we are developing some recommendations of how we might be able to collectively tackle some of the issues that were highlighted earlier. So we're really keen to hear from you, whether that's council, supplier, the government department alike. We're really keen to hear kind of your insights and perspectives. So please do make sure that you are signed up to our newsletter, because we will be talking next steps and sharing more information about that in the coming weeks, and how to get involved. If you do have any questions about this show and tell in the meantime, please do not hesitate to get in touch, and we'd be happy to answer any questions or have a conversation about what we've presented today. But thank you so much. Hope you found it useful.